Assalamu alaikum. We often hear about a buzzword, narrative. There are, a couple of things about narrative. One is, when we talk of narrative, we discuss negative narrative and a positive narrative. So when we come to our country, so there's a Pakistani narrative and there is a not so Pakistani narrative. So what is narrative and why it is important in today's media age and today's the world which is made of perceptions in the media? Why it is important to talk about narrative is because narrative actually drives so many things in reality on ground. So we will talk about narrative, how narrative is built in today's pivot. To discuss building narrative on CPEC, we have with us Dr. Zafar Iqbal, who is head of Department of Mass Communication Department, International Islamic University, and is a known scholar in media world, and he has an expertise on Islamophobia, and he has a lot of works he has accomplished in that field. Welcome, Dr. Sir.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Sir, first of all, I would like to, for the consumption of my viewers, I would like to ask you, what is narrative?
Thank you very much for inviting me on this very sensitive issue because when we talk about narratives and when we talk about narratives on CPEC and BRI, that becomes, of course, something very sensitive and something very conspicuous at the same time. As far as question of what the narratives are exactly and who are the, in fact, agencies behind building narratives. Narratives are, in fact, the simplistic form of representation of any complex phenomenon. I mean, the complex phenomenon means the phenomenon which is not otherwise understandable for the people. So for that matter, normally the narratives are built up so that the people should be able to understand those things in a very simplified fashion. And that simplicity, most of the time, in fact, put into a very simple reality into some kind of oblivion one. And this is something that the people get benefit out of that. And for instance, your enemy is making a narrative on you just because of it that you are becoming somehow demoralizing the whole system. So they will be trying to build a negative narrative out of you. So this is a time when you have to, of course, come up with something which is positive in nature and defeating the negative narratives that your enemy is in fact making. The best thing to understand narrative is to understand that what exactly you are doing, and if it is very complex in nature, you have to transform it into a simplified fashion so that people should be able to understand the whole game, which is very complex, which is very subtle in nature, and that is easy for them to digest. Normally, there are 5-6 different agencies or 5-6 different, departments that are considered responsible for building narratives. In developed world, we have seen, you might have seen different examples. Like for instance, we have the think tanks. They are very active in building narratives, and of course, whatever the narrative they have built, that is basically based on the research that they have conducted. So this is something very important and essential part of building narrative. If your narratives are not based on some kind of research on that, of course, then that would not stay long. Second important thing is your media are very important tools to build narratives. Not only to build narratives, but to perpetuate those narratives in the societies. And of course, states are also very important components. They are also involved in building narratives about their activities, about their enemies, about themselves. And the foremost is, in fact, the intelligentsia of every society. Intelligentsia are also very important because whatever you want to say and you want to convey about the things that you are doing, so you are of course involved and engage the intelligentsia of that society so that you should be able to convey, develop and then convey those narratives to the people.
Dr. Sir, when we talk of building narrative, is one that we wanted to talk about it generally. What is a narrative? Now, when we come specifically to China-Pakistan corridor, economic corridor, so when it is successful, when the project is, flourishing, it is successful, things are okay. So why one should need to build a narrative?
Actually, that's a very interesting question because once you are doing something, then it should speak itself. I mean, the fact should speak itself instead of the narratives. Of course, this is something which is a bygone date. No, in fact, the realities are not as such the realities which are existing on grounds. Realities are most of the time constructed. And they are constructed with the help of narratives. They are constructed with the help of the media. We most of the time do not know about the reality itself because you see something is happening right now in Islamabad, for instance. So you have a way to in fact express that what is happening over. But the way media are trying to express, because you see, world is not actually witnessing whatever is there on the ground. They have to see things with the window of the media, with the window of the narratives. If you are not in fact building up any kind of narrative, then your enemies are in fact engaged in those kind of narratives which are negative against you. So what you will be left with, of course. You are doing good things, but still you are going to have a bad name in the societies, in the world overall. So I think this is very essential to build up narratives so that you should be there to portray an absolutely unbiased picture to the world. This is one way. Second thing is that building a narrative before in fact launching something. You know, most of the things that you launch, or most of the very big initiatives that you launch, you need to have, of course, big narratives to be built up among them. Because unless you build narratives before you launch anything, you will not be able to sell those ideas to the people. So narrative building is something very essential even before the launching of any kind of development project or launching of any kind of big mega projects. So this is something very essential. Reason being that otherwise people will not be able to accept what you are doing. So unless you, in fact, you see, this is a war of use kind of metaphors, a war which is fought at the cognition level, at the mental level. So you have to, of course, to win the words, win the hearts of the people, win the war in the minds of the people. You actually wage a war. So this is something very important, and same it goes true once you're going to develop any kind of big development projects like CPEC.
Dr. Sahab, I've been asked to take a break. Will you right back after the break? Dr. Sahab, we were discussing about CPEC and how narratives are built, and why at first place we require a narrative to advance, you know, about anything that we do at state level or maybe at national level. Since I asked many scholars this question, that whether we really require a narrative to be built for CPEC.
Yes, of course, because you see, Pakistan is located at a place where you have a lot many enemies. I mean, you are all sides, in fact, enemies all around. And once something goes on good and something that can help develop this country, of course, the enemies would not like it. And in that case, of course, they will try to develop those negative narratives so that the world is becoming your enemy. The world is not there to accept whatever the good things that you are doing. So for that, of course, they would always go for it. You see, it's now over the time when the war was being fought on the boundaries only, and there was some kind of physical war over there. No, this is time of the psychological warfares. And once the psychological warfare is there, of course, narratives are the best tools through which the psychological warfares are fought usually. So you need to have, of course, psychological, these kind of things, ready for these kind of psychological warfares. So you need to, of course, have these narratives to protect yourself, to protect your people, protect your country, and protect your mega projects. So these are, I think, very essential in these days.
Right. Dr. Sahab, you know, when CPEC started in 2013, 2014, when it started in Pakistan, and you know, we saw a lot of activity on both sides, both in China and Pakistan, and we knew it's a mega project, and you know, the Chinese actually have a lot of hopes with this project as a pilot project, because they think this is a kind of pilot project for Belt and Road Initiative that they are carrying out. So when initially we heard few phrases like game changer and fate changer, so that, do you think that was an attempt to create a sort of soft or positive image or positive narrative of CPEC?
I think this was something that we did in haste, I believe. Because unless something which is based on research and something which is able to see things far in future, you should not vomit it and you should not say it at a state level, I think. When we talk about the game changer, or when we talk about something which is there to change the fate of the entire country, I think we should have given it as something much better than that. Game changers mean that it means that Pakistan is now going to align itself to a different country, what it used to be in the past. So of course you are in fact inviting so many enemies just because of this reason that you are trying to change the whole scenario of the game that you are playing. So I don't think that that would pay much to Pakistan and Pakistan's politics overall. I think we should have gone for something much softer than that instead of saying that it's the game changer. For that matter, I can say, why don't you talk about building bridges through the roads and initiatives like development and infrastructure developments? Why don't you talk about that? I mean, Pakistan in this case is becoming a very important country which is in fact connecting China with the entire Muslim world. China is in fact connecting China with the Western world. So why don't we take this kind of thing that Pakistan is in fact bridging the gaps which are culturally, socially and ideologically available between the two important states of the world. One is in fact the Chinese bloc, another is in fact the Western bloc. So you are trying to connect them. So that could have been probably the much better narrative than saying it's just a game changer.
Dr. Sahab, when we talk of China, Chinese are very wise people. For instance, when they said "Obor," one belt, one road, so that phrase, in fact, was not didn't go down well with the West, and there was objections. How can you have one road and one belt? So they changed it wisely. They said, okay, let's call it initiative. Now, with initiative, this is another narrative that they are trying to advance or build. They changed from Abor to BRI. That means they have changed a kind of narrative from the offending narrative to a kind of soft or connecting, the way you said, bridging narrative, like Belt and Road Initiative. So when we talk of positive or negative narrative, now there are a few terms that detractors of CPEC use, or we can, those who have actually hostility to such an economic project in Pakistan, they use these terms like cultural invasion, East India Company, or debt trap. These are now something that is paraphrased to give sort of a negative image of CPEC. What do you say about that?
The first thing that you asked, this is something very interesting when you were saying that the change of narrative from UBO to BRI. Yeah, of course, this is something very interesting that the West once raised this kind of objection that why you are talking of one belt, one road. So they in fact changed it to BRI, Belt Road Initiative. Here I raise a point that I think China is going somewhat defensive in whatever they are doing, because they do not want to engage in any kind of negativities with the West, because that is becoming their market, and you would not like your market to be somehow offensive towards you. So China has to of course retreat from its initial stance to building up something absolutely new, and BRI then it became something very acceptable. Okay, in this case this is okay, but the question is that one should not of course keep on doing things like that whenever there is some kind of offensive from the West on you and on your initiatives, on your objectives, that you keep on yourself pushing back. No, I think that should not be the policy. But this policy is being most of the time applied and most of the time being used by even the Chinese media. For example, West is saying many negative things about situation of human rights in China, and they are then providing some kind of facts and figures to prove that they are wrong. I don't think that would prove much fertile in case of having a long-term strategy towards this kind of subject. They have to of course have something, to counter the Western narratives. So counter narrative is important. Then instead of giving some kind of facts and figures to the negative narratives that are being built in the Western media. So I think they need to have, of course, changed their policy of addressing this kind of thing. And the second thing that you were asked in this one question was that we have, of course, so many people around, so many countries around, those who do not like the China's passing through Pakistan and building, a lot of projects, developing a lot of projects in East to West. For instance, I gave example in a very open way that India is in fact creating some kind of problem, because they think that whatever the Chinese Belt Road Initiative is doing, from Xinjiang to Pakistan and then to Gwadar, that is moving through Gilgit-Baltistan. And they declared that Gilgit-Baltistan is of course part of AJK. So this is still a disputed area. And once the area is disputed, China should not in fact engage itself into building up some kind of projects over there. Because in that case, they also have a right to have some kind of say in the whole process. So they are in fact now trying to build this narrative in the world that whatever the region is now becoming the ushering point or being the initial point of start of this project, that is in fact a disputed one. So they would like to this way make the whole project very disputed in terms of that this is going through a very disputed area. I think government of Pakistan and government of China, they should collectively fight off this kind of narratives that are being built up by their enemies. Same is true, I think, in some of the other countries as well, where they are thinking that we also have some part to have, control to have in Gwadar as well, because we are also located somewhere close to that. So whatever is activities going on over that will also be affecting us in a way. So I think Pakistan and China again sit together and brood over these issues and think about that what should be in fact the long-term narratives to save our interest in the region and make all the process very smooth.
Dr. Sahab, it's a very interesting discussion going on, but I'm asked to take a break. We meet after a short break. Dr. Saab, when we discuss of narratives, now how to address this negativity, how to address this, since there are hostile, countries and hostile powers and hostility to this project. So what at first place we should do to address the negative narrative about CPEC?
Actually, we need to understand this thing, that this is happening first time, that the development flow is moving somehow contrary to what used to be there in the past. For instance, you might have heard that everything is coming from north to south. Everything is coming from developed world to the underdeveloped world. And wherever we are located, I mean China, Pakistan, India, Afghanistan, Iran, we all are located we are located at a place where we usually are historically are accustomed to some kind of at the receiving end. So this is first time happening in the history of the world that a contra flow has initiated. Contra flow means that the development is in fact moving from this underdeveloped world to the developed world in shape of some kind of economic products, some kind of economic activities are being generated from this area, while it has always been there at the receiving end. So that is natural that the war of narrative would start, because we are posing huge challenges to the future of the West, huge challenges to the developed world. So that kind of thing would not be easily digested by them. So for them, of course, this is something about their survival. Because earlier, you see what they were doing. They were saying that this is a kind of ideology which has to be prevalence, which have more power in the system. And now they are thinking that probably the ideology's warfare is now over. No, the warfare is based on economy and economy only. And economic powers or economic giants are now becoming, you see, a part of, I mean, they are being generated through this region or through these powers which are located in south. So I think this is something very important to understand, that the war of narratives and war of ideologies are over, and war of economic gains and economic supremacy and hegemony is in fact taking place. So this is something very important that we need to understand, and we have to, of course, give this word, that the economy or economic development should not hinder the process of the development of the whole world.
Dr. Supplementary to what I asked you earlier, now what should be specifically, what should be the narrative to be built on CPEC?
I think we all should sit together, because narrative building is not something that could be done in a day or in a 2 days time. It has to be built up on some kind of research, some kind of data, and something that should be able to see things far from today, number one. And number two, narrative should have the capacity to perpetuate itself, instead of having to be perpetuated with the help of some kind of, you see, forceful agencies in the world. For instance, the media, for instance, the intellectuals, or for instance, the state. So it should have the propensity to grow itself. So for that, of course, we have to have some big research data available with us. We should have think tanks over there. And I think that the best way would be to develop this kind of narratives on the basis of the infrastructural development that we are trying to build. That is changing the whole fabric of our world. Because the China is in fact coming up the infrastructural development projects more than probably the ideological development projects, which used to be, of course, in the past the job of the West, because they were building up most of the time ideological things. Now we are building something which are infrastructure based. So we have to, of course, base our narratives on the infrastructural development and connecting through those infrastructural development, connecting East with the West.
Dr. Saab, it's very interesting discussion going on. I just want to ask for the last question, that do you think BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, is branded well? And there is branding of everything. Yeah. Are we doing something to brand CPEC the way it should be?
No, I really don't agree with this, that we are doing something best in this connection. We need to, of course, think more on that, because we have not yet engaged the people, those who can really brand it. I mean, you don't see any kind of cultural activities going on with these kind of economic and developmental activities. Unless you do anything like that, you won't be able to succeed in the world. Because you see, West has done always some kind of, symbiotic relationship they do or they create with the ideological thing that they put up for the world. For instance, if you do something, you have to, of course, attach it with some kind of, cultural and social things as well. You do, in that case, for instance, you are building power projects. So power provides what kind of cultural changes that would be bringing about in the societies. So you have to, of course, play those things up. What we normally call is a symbolic interactionism. West has always been in fact using. So why don't we use those kind of symbolic interactionism techniques to create that an aura, which is in fact creating some kind of acceptance of your ideas and your development projects all across the world.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saab. It's very interesting to hear you and discuss with you the very important topic of today's pivot. Thank you very much for joining us in our program.
Thank you.
Viewers, this is a very interesting debate that whether we should pursue or whether negativity on what we do on CPEC or positivity, and what measures should be taken on by all stakeholders and including the two governments about actually spreading a positive image of the two major projects which have in fact a capability of changing a lot in this, not only in the region but in entire world. That's all for today's pivot. Until next week, Allah Hafiz.